Hello and welcome. This is Ideagen TV, powered by Azure and presented globally by Microsoft. Today with us we have Sheri Hashemi, Product and Test Lead at Boeing. Welcome, Sheri.
Thank you, Ideagen. I am so excited to be back for this summit and to carry on a conversation we had during the Global Leadership Summit with David Younger from Vaital, putting the AI in Vaital. Thank you for joining me again, David.
Sheri, thank you. And thanks, Ideagen, for having us.
Okay, so this is going over innovation, and what I really love about Vaital is your guys' approach towards solving problems to the point where you go straight to it and say, how do we solve the impossible? How do we solve the unsolvable problems? And I just really appreciate that approach of putting some framing around it, because then you can go solve it. So do you mind just touching a little bit on Vaital's work and how you came about? Well, tell me what you don't think is possible.
Oh, great question. Thank you for the opportunity. Well, over the past 2 decades, Sheri, I've had the privilege of serving in leadership roles for some of the biggest technology and workforce development companies on the planet. And in terms of innovation, amidst this global pandemic and cultural transformation that we're all seeing, we're all outside our comfort zone, aren't we? And as a result, we've seen 5 years worth of innovation virtually overnight, and particularly in the area of software engineering and AI. And yet, in the case of AI, innovation's really hard. Well, it's always hard, but in the case of AI, 85% of projects fail, according to Gartner data. And that's why I launched Vaital. We solve the world's unsolvable problems. And it's an oasis of brilliance where enterprises come to innovate at light speed. So it's really an honor to have this conversation again. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Absolutely, David. And I love how you phrase that, oasis of brilliance.
Thank you. Well, it really is. It's hard to innovate. And the constraint is three areas. Typically, it's talent, it's data, and it's even knowing where to start. We can help companies figure that out. And then there's security, which is a showstopper in itself. So there's been some really exciting approaches that our clients have taken to drive rapid innovation at a hyperscale and hyperspeed. So I'd be glad to talk about more of those. We can dive right into, how do you actually innovate on a team? Where would you like to start today?
I think actually let's start with why, David.
Yeah, well, that's great. We talked a little bit in our previous conversations, Sheri. I love Simon Sinek, a big fan. I think his Rockstar TED Talk that's gotten millions and millions of views started in Seattle when he first had the concept for the book, and that's where we're based here in Seattle. And there's this extremely powerful force in the world, and it's called inertia, right? And people fear change. They generally resist it. And how do you overcome it is really the question. Particularly a lot of the massive old school enterprises that we work with every day, they really struggle to try to move faster. It's kind of like, burning a barge at times. So how do you do that? You work at Boeing, right? What's that like for you? I'm sure you've encountered resistance to change over the course of your time there. And even when there's the desire to change, how are you making that happen?
I'd have to agree with you. I think the folks that have initial inertia down one path, it can be hard to stop that.
Yeah.
It's great that it's moving in its path and it's doing its thing. If you have to pivot to get into a different frame, and I feel like you have to be in a separate kind of mental space environment to be in an innovative place of thinking.
Yep.
And I think one of the ways to help change the path of that inertia, or to reinvigorate, or to pivot, whatever directional word you want to put to it, I think it's about creating that space, creating that environment where folks are able to go ahead and tap into other parts of their brain, ideas they might have been sitting on for, who knows how long, or there was never really the opportunity or the chance. And I think it's creating that environment of pulling those people together and being able to help foster and create that stable space to get those ideas to come out and bubble to the surface.
It can be a challenge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you create, you started to touch on that idea of a safe place where, you're not going to alienate half the room, because half the folks in the room aren't going to probably say anything anyway. My wife, half the time she's telling me to stop talking, because when I oftentimes, people who talk a lot like I do, and maybe historically people who look like me, have been the loudest voices. And so how do you create space for folks who maybe haven't felt safe in the past to do that? And one thing there's no silver bullet here, right? It's just about try to make people feel comfortable. But one thing that we found to work is just to start off with some humor and tell some embarrassing stories from if the leaders can get up in the room and really not be afraid to embarrass themselves a little bit, right? Show that humility. And just get some laughter in the room. Laughter is a powerful force. So oftentimes my partner and I, we will share an embarrassing story from our past to kick it off. And the bigger you go, the bigger you set that bar, that people will only go as far as you go, right? So you got to kind of dig deep with that one. But it's just been really fun to there's all kinds of studies on the power of laughter to really unlock get people out of their anxiety, which is an inhibitor to innovation. What have you found to be successful?
I think something I want to touch on is the failure piece. I think often failure is bad. Yeah, and one of the examples is like weightlifting. You're supposed to go to failure with some of your lifting techniques. Failure is failure. You have to change your mindset on what that actually really means, because without that level of failure and pushing to that limit, you're not getting the most from that experience. And I think often, in our environments that are competitive and they're moving so fast and so far forward and leaning in and leaning over, failure is not an option. Like, you're not supposed to fail. And I think that's part of this environment that you're creating, like you said, of, people are only going to go as far as the leaders take them in terms of that space and that comfort zone. And taking failure from a different aspect, I think, might be a better way for us to kind of reframe our heads around what that really looks like. Because is failure truly failure? I mean, to a dictionary, to a very strict definition, versus innovation. What is there failure in innovation?
Well, great question. Yeah, it's required, actually. And I think it takes organizations who recognize that and who actually take it one step further to actually celebrate that. That it's safe enough to do that, and it takes a top-down cultural change. And I think the word innovation literally means to introduce something new, make change in anything established, or to introduce something new as if for the first time. And for many organizations, this is really new muscle. You mentioned the kind of analogy of weightlifting. Yeah, you've really got to break down that old muscle before you can build new ones. And a quick story from my time at Microsoft, and I was in product management, and I was working for this group that was building solutions for the next billion people on the planet. Gates had this mission of creating software for, putting a PC in every desktop and in every business, every home on the planet. And but maybe we'd reached 1 billion people by the early 2000s, but that's it, right? It was kind of stopped there, because the next 6 billion, many of them don't have equal access to the opportunities we all take for granted. And so we were innovating. The idea was to create products with that are relevant to people's lives, that are affordable, that are accessible, and can scale to 1 billion people. And we were creating this video that was really telling the story of what this product did. And my boss at the time looked at the video and he kind of shook his head and he said, I'm like, what do you mean? It's like this great video, this great product story. He's like, He's like, where's the dirty sock? And I'm like, what are you talking about? The dirty sock? He's like a former Tide, product guy, and a lot of the Microsoft guys came from consumer product marketing, and he's like, every Tide commercial, they put up the dirty sock, right? And it looks awful. And every mother at home, like, I'm gonna have great clean socks. So, but you got to start with that dirty sock. And so, what's the connection? Well, you need to make clear to people in order to get any change, right? Because people resist the status quo so much, you have to make it clear the situation is so bad that whatever we do, we cannot endure the status quo any longer. It's unacceptable. And you're seeing that now across the world with COVID and with racial equity movement and with Me Too, just to name a few. People are fed up. They're enough is enough, right? So you've reached the tipping point, hopefully, but you need then a just cause behind it, as Simon Sinek says, to start with why, right? And you need leadership championing and rallying behind that just cause, top to bottom. And that why is so powerful because the one who knows why, I think it was Ralph Waldo Emerson said, the one who knows why will always work for the one who knows, the one who knows how will always work for the one who knows why. And I love the stories that Simon Sinek, shares, and start with why around the Wright brothers and Steve Jobs and Martin Luther King Jr. And really, you put those three in the same sentence, doesn't seem like a fit, right? Mm-hmm. But what they all had in common is they started with the dream, right? Wright brothers, to the dream of flight. Can you imagine how incredible it would be to fly? And Steve Jobs saying, wow, think different. What would that look like to change every industry top to bottom, right? Mm-hmm. And Martin Luther King Jr. Dream that the whole world would come together in unity, right? People of all races, all backgrounds. 25% of the people at the March on Washington were white. Why did they go? Why did they leave work and go take buses and, volunteer standing in the, sun to go listen to this preacher from the deep South? Is because they believed in the dream. And so starting with why is classic. But back to your point around failure, they all had to fail hundreds of times, right? What did Edison say? I found 1,000 ways, 10,000 ways not to make a light bulb, right? Before he finally, the light went on.
Yeah. The light went on. Pun intended. Yeah. Why is so incredibly powerful. Yeah. And to go back to a few things that you had said, specifically the top-down change of driving that. So you have been successful at Vaital with your teams and your engineers, and you are solving impossible problems. What are you doing that has helped setting that environment to make your teams feel safe to fail, know it's okay to fail, have the security in taking steps in radical areas in different ways? How are you moving your team to create that environment?
Well, look, we don't have all the answers. I feel like I'm one of the least qualified people to answer that question, but I'm learning as we go. But I think starting with why, figuring out that just cause for us, it's solving the world's unsolvable problems. And that attracts the very best and brightest people in the world to go solve the problems that nobody solved. And then that allows us to solve even more problems. It becomes this virtuous cycle that continues to repeat itself. So I just surround myself with amazing people and watch amazing things happen. But I think we all have brilliance inside of us. And I love what Jim Collins says in his book, Good to Great. It's really this concept that he calls the Hedgehog Principle, which is three things. It's what are you deeply passionate about? Number one. Number two, what can you be best in the world at? Truly best in the world. And three, what is it that drives your economic engine? And starting there, both from I think each of us as individuals, and then as corporately, whether we're a nonprofit or whether we're a for-profit organization, whatever our role is, we have to figure that out for our organization. But and then at Vaital, taking it one step deeper, we have a really simple innovation framework that my co-founder came up with. It's really consisting of three simple but critical questions. And it's number one, which ideas will have the biggest impact on revenue and profitability growth? Thinking big in that sense, right? Number two, which ideas have the largest long-term impact on building true competitive advantage? And then thirdly, you might come up with 50 ideas in that exercise. But then thirdly is which ideas can actually be tested fastest. And by fast, I mean like fewer than 6 months. Can you actually prove this thing is technically and business wise viable? And the good news is that it doesn't take any special education or technical skill to get there. What I think it takes is imagination, creativity, curiosity, frankly, diversity, people who see the world differently and think differently than you do with divergent experiences. The data are clear that heterogeneous teams outperform homogeneous teams every time, and nearly every time. And then creating that safe space and the humility I mentioned earlier around getting to that point of laughter and even self-embarrassment for the cause, and then really setting up a place where you can listen and just empower the people around you to share what's inside of them that maybe they've been afraid to share in the past. But that takes a growth mindset, to borrow from Carol Dweck, and it takes a culture where, as you said, really, I think brilliantly, Sheri, that where failure is not only okay, it's celebrated.
I think that's great. And the listening piece, I think that's so incredibly important, because you can start with why you can create that environment. If you aren't listening from all of the different arenas or the groups or the communication styles, you're going to miss something, or something's not going to surface. And I think that next step is figuring out how to listen. And, there's a couple, inherently there's folks at the table who won't speak up. Like you had mentioned previously, there's just some people who, are so freely to give their ideas, and they don't have that fear, or they don't have that anxiety, and they're going to put it out on the table, and they're excited and they're passionate and they're going to put those out. And then you have a couple people who are on that table on one side or the other that are just not going to speak up. It's not their personal character. It's not how they operate. And so I think that gets to that next step of how do you extract the ideas and those innovative perspectives from the folks who aren't necessarily going to use the same environment in the same way. And I think that first step is recognizing that you're going to have to listen. It's that active listening, and then figuring out, they made a comment. So do you go to them after the meeting and say, hey, you had this great thing, and then you pull on that thread and you go and you grab that piece, but it might not be in a big group. And so I think that that's a big piece of working through that. And then to me, hopefully with my teams, that creates that space outside to help bring that in. So the next time you're at that table and everybody's seated there, they're less likely to stay quiet. And
So good. Like many things in life, I've learned the most from my wife. She is one of those quiet folks who just never was comfortable speaking up, especially in bigger groups. And over the last several years has found her voice, and it's amazing. And it's really been an incredible journey for her and for me to really kind of rediscover that process of sharing, finding our voice, me dialing it down, her dialing it up a little bit. And as we've shared, we've actually led groups as well. And what I've found is there's, no matter how good the setup is, and no matter how great the culture might be in terms of things I described earlier, if the group's too big, there's people who still won't say anything. Even if it's just the right size, there's people who still won't say anything. But in terms of really, we found that a group of maybe 7 to 10 is ideal. Creating those small groups where there's lots of different kinds of thinking in the room, where that's actually how we do our software development as well, in these little pods of these tiny little teams. And you have to, I think, work in that setting to get the best thinking out. And I want to hear that thought that you mentioned, that maybe that one person who, there's a gem there, but I want to dig deeper even in the meeting, and just sometimes just 3 words, tell me more. right? It gives someone the freedom
Mm-hmm.
to take a breath and think about it and share more.
I like that. Tell me more. I really, and I think sometimes we overcomplicate things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's such pressure around performing and getting out that idea that, you know, the simplicity, there's beauty in the simplicity of some ideas, and that doesn't have to be necessarily at some excessively profound level that's super, super groundbreaking. It could just be a different viewpoint and that different approach at looking at that. And I'm actually going to use that. Tell me more. I think that's a really great way to help bolster that environment of, you know, like you want to be heard. And I think that that's another display of how you actively listen to the folks and their ideas. I think that's really, I'm using that. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I need to remind myself to do it too, because so often we get excited by what we hear and we want to build on that. We want to talk over people, whatever. But sometimes just taking that deep breath and and it's also a great one when you don't know what to say, right?
True.
Yeah.
True.
We had a great conversation the other day, Sheri, where you were sharing about this idea of the fast follower concept. And boy, that's just such a powerful story. And that video of the guy dancing on the cliffside and looking like a complete idiot, right? And I've been there like every day, you know, dude, that nut out dancing by himself. And even though I'm a terrible dancer, but anyway, I digress. So he's out there, you know, having fun on the hill, and it's really not until he gets that first follower that's really the turning point. Do you want to maybe build on that a little? Because I think that's so key for some of the things we're talking about here.
I absolutely agree. So that first follower video, you know, there's this person dancing and they're all by themselves, and they really you get the impression from this person that they don't care what anybody thinks or how they might look or what's coming across. And then that one person is bold enough to join them. So they help them, they embrace them. And then the next person comes and the next person comes. And then I think at certain part of the video, you've got people jumping over people sitting on the ground to get there, to join, to show that level of energy. And I think that that's a big piece of starting that environment. And I think celebrating those first followers who are willing to take the risks to step forward is what helps create that environment. And that, you know, to round this out, takes that active listening of, you know, observance, you know, listening, observance, watching, taking it all in, taking a second. I think that's a big piece of creating that environment. And, you know, I think also embodying, you know, what you're putting forth, because you're doing it every day. And it's absolutely incredible what Vaital's doing and how you're going about it. Because you're not just doing it, you know, it's almost like each one of those companies is your first follower. And you're going in and then they're getting on board, and then you're building more and you're doing more and you're doing more. And then, you know, all of these impossibles are, you know, well, so past possible that you're on to the next thing. And I think that is the embodiment of creating that innovation, that innovative environment. You know, it's just, to me, I think that's where it sits with the first follower.
Oh, well, I think it's so profound, and I'm so glad you shared that video, because it's I think I'd seen it before, but it's like somehow when you actually dive deeper there's so much wisdom when you really stop. And I think there's those moments of wisdom all around us every day if we just stop and like get out of ourselves and like just think, just breathe. Like, wow, you know, there's miracles all around it. There's wisdom that we can actually apply. And I think where I struggle, you know, our clients are just having some amazing success stories, and you're exactly right about what you said. Where I struggle is internally, is figuring that out, that I don't have to do it alone, that I don't have to be. In fact, not only do I not have to do it alone, but when I bring in others to go take the stage and shine and show them how to do that, or not even how, but that it can be done, like, and then let them get up and shine. That's really, I think, the challenge of any great leader is to to raise up that talent around them who can then raise up the talent around them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Building that all up. To wrap up our conversation, because we've touched so much, and it's really about going after the impossible and creating that environment, really building that environment off of your why, and then continuing that inertia with those leadership infusions as you go along in that path and process, and really bolstering those first followers, whether it be an individual company, it be the quiet person on your team, it be the first person who's stepping forward. And I think that that's a great start for trying to figure out how do we get innovative, because if you're in an inertial path and you're moving on your trajectory and you're trying to do something different, how do you get started? And I think that those are all really great elements to put together to help get those ideas out there and really push the envelope forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is it's so exciting we're on the cusp of something truly like once in a lifetime type change right now. And so for me, it's just the opportunity is inspiring, and the responsibility is humbling, frankly, because I realize how challenging it is to do what we're talking about. And none of us have all the answers, but that's where it's so great, I think, to have these conversations of learning from one another, sharing, and learning from so many other great leaders out there.
Absolutely. And, to touch base on something you had talked about having a voice. And I really think that, when you have your voice and you've found it and you have that strength to use it, you've got to speak up for those who don't necessarily have the ability to speak up or aren't in a place to speak up. And it's really on us to take those first steps when you do end up having one, and the ability to get a platform and a space to do so. So I think that's a solid point, and it is humbling to be able to be at this space and time and know we are truly on the cusp of some really great things with a community inertial movement and all that other good stuff too. So any parting words for creating your innovative spaces and solving the impossible?
Well, Sheri, I think there's three things for me. It's number one is just recognize your identity. That identity authentication is a big part of our business, quite literally. But for me anyway, it's recognizing that I'm uniquely created in the image of God and chosen and called by name. And as I move forward and we move forward with AI, let's recognize our inherent value and our inestimable worth as human beings, first and foremost. I think if we do that, the rest will fall into place. The second is just what you said, embrace failure. Fail fast, fail forward. What can you do in 60 days, 90 days, 180 days? One of two things are going to happen. Either you win or you learn, and that's a guarantee. And thirdly, just to bring it back where we started start with why. Nothing's impossible. Dream big, start dreaming now. What would it look like if? What would happen if? Start with a why so powerful and so compelling that people will follow you anywhere. And you'll get those band of first followers and people jumping over one another to go, make it happen. And you'll find that you can transform the impossible into an unstoppable force for good.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. And really appreciate your time again. And just so excited to continue to watch Vaital as you grow as a company and acquire more and more first followers from those corporations and spread the goodness of changing it all.
Well, it's such an honor to have this conversation with you, Sheri, and to see the incredible work you're doing at Boeing and the air and space industry. Is just, you're literally doing rocket science. So I'm humbled. Thanks for having this conversation today.
And Ideagen, thank you for hosting us again.